What up, everybody? It's JP Finlay. It's Washington Football Talk podcast. We're brought to you by Oarsman Automotive of Virginia. We ride with them. Want you to do the exact same thing. You can check them out, oarsmanda.com. Talked to Bob Biaggi this morning. He's coming to Raleigh, and he's fired up. Garv is coming as well, so we're going to have a good old time at the Cap Stadium Series. I'm looking forward to that. I think I've never done one of these Winter Classic games, so I'm excited for that.
Yes, you have.
No, I haven't.
When the Caps played at Navy, we did the tailgate segment outside Navy's football stadium for the pregame show. Okay. We bought the grill that currently sits outside on my front porch.
That is true. So I guess I have done one of these. I didn't stay for the whole game, but alas. Mitch is here, obviously. Pete is here. We're back from Arizona. Had a lovely trip. At some point, maybe we recount some hijinks from out there, but actual Super Bowl, awesome game. Kind of a bummer that it ends on a penalty like that. I think, Philly's really good, but if you get them in negative down and distance, I think they have a tough time. And I mean, Hurts was a straight up magician. Some of those throws, the 3rd and 14 to Goddard, that's among the best throws in the NFL this season. So if there's any idiots remaining that don't think he can pass, I got a bridge to sell you going over to Chesapeake Bay. But I enjoyed the game. I don't have a ton on it, except for the fact that I've gotten the last 6 Super Bowls correct.
That's a pretty good claim, JP. You convinced me to go with the Chiefs, much like you and I had Georgia and Alabama in last year's title game. So I'm just going to keep following you on all football championship games. I want your USFL picks. I want your XFL picks. I want all that.
Do I recall the big man just throwing out $50 bets because he was on the Eagles? Do I recall that?
Oh,
I think we had a dinner bet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember some bets happening in the backseat of an Uber, but I don't remember the specifics.
Yeah. Well, there's also a Heineke bet. There's a lot of bets we have to settle. That probably won't ever get settled.
That bet was certainly not in that backseat of an Uber. That was sitting at Taylor's bar in Arizona. But yeah, I was on the Eagles, and
the Uber got us there. I'm sure the conversation lasted lots of places,
and I'm sure it wasn't just a quick disagreement before things went south.
Let's get to the ownership stuff. Unless anybody has something they need to say about the Super Bowl.
Sucks the game ended the way it did. That was lining up to be one of the best Super Bowls ever. Still was damn good, and shows you that no matter how good the team is, when you have the best player in the game, you can't count them out. Pat Mahomes is freaking incredible.
Don't commit a penalty at the end of a game. That's my advice to James Bradberry.
I mean, I appreciate Bradberry stepping up and saying that it was a penalty and he hoped that you didn't call it. And I think the hope they didn't call it part was the important part, because they didn't call it the rest of the game. So yes, it was a penalty. We can all agree on that. But at the same time, if you don't call it the entire game, then the players feel they can get away with it. So sucks it happened. Love the guy that he stood up for it and took ownership of it, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Yeah, he did it.
If you're speeding all the time and you don't get caught, you're still speeding.
I thought the more egregious one was in the second quarter. It was like a similar choice route where Juju broke in and Bradberry held him, and they didn't call it, and Juju was right. And that kind of sets up you didn't call it then, why are you calling it later? But end of the day, man, you did it. So also, maybe I'm wrong on this because we didn't get to see Hurts try to go back down the field, but that game was still awesome. I'm not locked in.
The game was still awesome. Don't get me wrong. Just went from being a very, very good Super Bowl from a great Super Bowl.
I have a theory, Peter. I think for Mitch, it's not as awesome because he didn't win, and for you and I, it's awesome.
Yeah.
For the record, I had the over too, so I was just fine on it. And
I had the Chiefs in the over.
Did you parlay him?
2 wins is better than 1.
Already grumpy. Ownership stuff.
Accounting, I'm happy to.
Ownership. Remember that we kept talking about the Super Bowl when we run out of time later. 9:35 a.m. Tuesday, Valentine's Day. What says Valentine's Day like the three of us yapping about football? New report from the New York Post that Josh Harris has liquidity issues. that this thing isn't going as high as Dan wants, that the Bezos interest remains completely up in the air. Bezos may end up buying it at the last minute. Bezos might want the Seahawks, which is something I had heard a while back. I mean, if you're gonna walk into a situation, the Seahawks have an awesome stadium, packed fans, probably a coach that goes to the Hall of Fame, maybe borderline. You know, you walk into this situation, you got to come up with the money to build a stadium, or at least the political juice to go halvesies with some jurisdiction. This is not an easy thing to walk into. And what we can all tell ourselves as people that live here and grew up bleeding burgundy and gold is, oh man, but when you get this thing right, you're going to be printing cash. There are probably some financial analysts out there that are like, I'm not sure that's going to happen, dude. Like the drop in everything that's happened is so significant that it could be a lot harder than we believe it to be. I'm not taking anything away from the reporters on the story, but everything coming out from the New York Post has been kind of its own thing. And I haven't heard a lot of that stuff. I have a tough time believing the liquidity issues when he's got a number of other assets he could sell, but I guess that's liquid. I've heard, I think there is a real push to get, it's such an awkward way of phrasing this, not a minority owner, but like an actual person of, like a black dude owner. So not minority in you only own 40%, but not a white dude is what I've heard, that is a real valuable push going on in some pockets around the league. I still think it's happening. I still think it happens with some. I still think March is the target. I still think it's going to be Harris, but I'm not ruling anything out. I'm not. If Byron Allen gets involved, I think there's this dude, David Stewart. But like, if we're talking about liquidity issues, Byron Allen's net worth is at like 1.3 billion, and a lot of that is tied up into like assets. I mean, unless the NFL is going to change down payment rules or something, but I just don't see them changing anything to help Dan. Could be wrong. You never know. I still think this gets sold. I'm not backing off that. I think it's just too far down the line. I don't know. Do you guys want to, I mean, there was also the stuff. I know that Harris, I know that Harris toured FedEx Field and Ashburn. I also know that Harris has looked at the group that I think it's HBSE has looked at real estate in all three jurisdictions of the DMV and has met with politicians. So like the wheels are moving. Whether or not it gets to the finish line, I don't know. And there's probably wheels moving for other people too.
Yeah, if Harris is doing all that homework, I don't think it's, he's not going to do all that just to screw around. I hear you on the New York Post being on its island with some of these stories. It almost seems to contradict the stuff that local guys or other national guys are reporting. Maybe that's Dan's side wanting to drive up the price more or get more people involved. Like, hey, some of these people that you've heard of aren't that ready. You can come in and join this and maybe get your NFL team. So I think it's absolutely going to happen. I'm not getting distracted by those stories. I think the tours and of course Bezos still being involved. Some people look at that as Bezos. We're not really sure. I think it's Bezos is not really sure, but could jump in at any point. So I think the sale happens, and I think we're actually getting pretty damn close to it.
JP, who was the guy you had on radio last week? From the Business Insider was talking about, who was friends with Dan, or at least was a associate of Dan's?
From Fox Business News, Gasparino, I believe.
Gasparino, yep.
Charles Gasparino.
So I think what was kind of interesting was when you listened to Charlie Gasparino last week, he's talked about how he's gotten to know Dan at least a little bit, not that they're best friends and hang out all the time, but I think, his point about this whole thing looks like it's moving towards a sale, but you never know what's going to happen at the last minute with Dan is always been a thing that you have to, pay attention to. And I think as we see some of these, I think a lot of fans and folks wanted it to be this linear, Dan hired Bank of America, Dan sells. And there's no kind of ups and downs kind of along the way. They wanted it to be, kind of down and dirty and no, no pitfalls to it. And I think are starting to see some of the leaks about, what may hold up Dan from potentially selling. The 30 years of erosion of a fan base, we can all think about what this fan base looked like, in the early 90s when they were winning Super Bowls and everyone was into it. But when you are analytics and data driven, which, so many of these investors are these days, it's hard to project what that fan base looks like if they quote unquote just won. And I think that's why you're seeing the price be a little bit lower. And I think that might be some of the frustration from Snyder's camp about, ultimately selling, is if he can't get the number he's looking for, then maybe he holds on to it. Like, what was it? Artie Moreno out with the Los Angeles Angels, pulled the Angels off the board because he wasn't quite getting the price he was looking for. But, at the end of the day, it's something that we're going to see. We're going to see these national reports going on both sides kind of up until the day it happens.
Yeah, man. I mean, I've been trying to chase this stuff pretty hard, and it was funny. We ran into some of the Commanders people on Friday at Radio Row, and then I got a call like 10 minutes after meeting them from someone telling me that Harris was at FedEx Field. And then I was like trying to find him and couldn't. And it's just like, there's the amount of calls and texts and random emails from people trying to tell me exactly what's going on. The amount of misinformation flying around, at least to me, is staggering. So I think that leads me to believe that something real is happening, and there's a whole lot of people trying to either distract or change it at the last minute. So I don't know. I do think it's the one thing that's important to point out, and all of the stuff the Harris group is doing now, and perhaps this mystery group we've heard about, like all that happened with Denver also. And then Walmart came in at the last minute and just gave more money. So
and remember,
all your due diligence you want, man. It doesn't guarantee a thing.
25 years ago, when Dan bought the team, he was the guy that came in at the last minute with the highest bid and kind of took over. Now, he was sort of involved earlier in some of the bidding as part of a group, but as far as being the leading man of the group, that popped in. He was, 12th hour, dropped in the highest bid, and all of a sudden he was the owner. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be like if Harris had a partner, because it was him and Milstein, and then Milstein dropped and he scrounged up the money. Yeah, we'll see, man. It's going to be very interesting. I think what day? It's Valentine's Day, and owners meetings start like the 25th of March. It'll be very interesting. And then it would get interesting if kind of push comes to shove. Like, say you can't get this thing sold, or Dan doesn't find somebody he wants to sell it to. What would happen after that? I don't think we get there. I don't think we ever see, dude, I noticed this thing in Peter King's, what is it called now? It's not Monday Morning Quarterback.
Football Morning in America, FMIA.
His last Football Morning in America. So this is the day after the Super Bowl. He does like the 10 things, I think. Number 5 was, man, it sure seems like Dan Snyder should sell soon. And then, I'm paraphrasing. And then number 6 was, gosh, it's very weird that the NFL hasn't released the Mary Jo White report. It's been almost a full year. So in my mind, and perhaps I'm a skeptic of things, I truly wonder, I'm not saying I believe, I wonder if there's a correlation between that report not coming out and Dan sure looks like he's selling, and if we ever see that report, if this gets sold. Just a thought. All right, let's get to the OC stuff. Greg Roman is coming in for an interview today. Today is Tuesday. It's believed Eric Bieniemy will have an interview once the Chiefs get their Super Bowl parade plans locked in. I kind of imagine those plans are locked in now. That was the last I heard Monday night when I was checking with people. Roman, if you want to run the snot out of the ball, Roman's your guy. He's had the number 1 rushing offense a ton. I think a lot of people get concerned about the offense being able to compete. I mean, hell, look at the teams we saw. Now, Philly runs the hell out of the ball, but Kansas City is a pass-first team. Look at kind of the final 4 in the title games. You had Philly and San Fran, which I would say are both run first teams. AFC, you had KC and the Bengals, which are pass first. The AFC has the best quarterbacks, so in turn, they are pass first teams. The NFC has good quarterbacks. I guess Hurts is in the great category, but you have to manufacture more stuff. And Roman can manufacture. What does that mean for McLaurin? What does that mean for Dotson, Samuel? I don't know, but if that's your path to winning games and getting in the playoffs, I'm not going to, if I was Ron, I wouldn't worry about, but this might piss off Terry or slow Jahan's development. Ron is probably looking at a new owner in the next 6 weeks, 2 months, and has to win. So if you're Ron, your focus is what's going to get us 10 wins. And maybe he thinks that's the track. We can all react to Roman, and then we'll go to Bieniemy.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that Roman, because it seemed like Ron was setting it up. We have one more interview to do. He's in the Super Bowl. We knew that was Bieniemy. Roman's been out there for a few weeks. We've recorded a pod about how he'd fit with this team as soon as he resigned, but now all of a sudden the team is talking to him too. I don't know if that's because Bieniemy just had a Super Bowl that raised his stock even higher, and Ron is like, okay, I think this guy's going to be ever popular, just like he always is, but even more so. We better have a backup plan. And we have Shermer way back here, but let's get someone who's a little more palatable for fans. But while Bieniemy is definitely the hottest name and the one I want, especially after the credit he's been given for that Super Bowl performance and the adjustments he helped make and the plays he inserted in the playbook, Roman is probably the best fit philosophy-wise with Ron. And if Bieniemy got here and wanted to throw all over the place and take advantage of those receivers, maybe Ron's stepping in his office and they're clashing a little, while Roman is going to be dreaming up ways to get these linemen moving all over the place and get 20 carries each for Robinson and Gibson. So I think either one is going to help this team be better in 2023. And it just comes down to what Ron wants. And that leads me to think that Roman, perhaps between Bieniemy's stock and Roman's profile, that it could be Roman.
To me, it doesn't make a ton of sense. To me, it doesn't make a ton of sense because if he's locked in on Roman as being the guy, there's no reason to float out this "we're waiting for Bieniemy" thing and create this whole storyline that's out there right now. To me, I think Roman almost feels like a backup option, hey, we want Bieniemy. If it doesn't happen, then we can fall back on Roman. He's certainly the steadier of the two candidates. He's the guy who fits what Ron and Martin are saying up there. They're going to have to rebuild the entire offensive line, which we've talked about a lot. And you want to talk about a run game guy who wants to step in and run the ball that much. He's not going to look at that, at what they have at the offensive line and be at all excited about it. So it's at least a point to be made that if they're bringing in Roman, they better have a plan for what they're going to do to be able to run the ball a little better.
Has he gotten other interviews? Forgive me for not knowing that.
I haven't really seen his name bandied about by insiders of the sort.
I didn't think so either. And that leads me to believe that he's not going to worry about the offensive line.
And it could be, this could be a good thing for Howell too. I mean, he's no Lamar Jackson, but Roman knows how to have a running quarterback. That could be a way to boost Howell's ceiling as well. But JP, what do you think about Roman?
I'm not against it. I think nobody's Lamar, and it's so weird because you can't talk about it without it becoming like a political thing. But if you go back to what Cap did in the Roman offense in San Fran, Howell's not exactly the same. Cap was longer and lankier and had that just complete missile of an arm. But Howell's got a gun, man, and he moves well. He's shorter and sturdier. I think he's got more of a Russ Wilson build. But I'd be curious to see Howell in this offense. I think he's a pretty good passer, and you've got good weapons. I mean, if you want to be a Roman apologist, you can say he never had good receivers. So they didn't post big numbers, but there weren't really opportunity. You know what I mean? The Ravens, for all they've tried to do, they've not had success drafting that first round wideout. I mean, look at the kid from Minnesota, Bateman, who was it? Hollywood Brown before that. Go back to those San Fran teams that got to the Super Bowl. Who was their best wideout? Michael Crabtree, probably.
Yeah, Greg Roman's had to work with Sammy Watkins like at 100 different places. Like he hasn't had the best stuff, but I still think receivers in his offense will be capped no matter how good they are because he wants to have all this run stuff first.
Yeah, RG3 had a good line with the Junkies. He said Greg Roman's the best run game coach I've ever seen, but that's a blessing and a curse. I'm not sure that that's what you want now, but it might be what Ron wants. And we're all, the one assumption we're making in this conversation is like, oh man, but you might set the receivers back. You might set Howell back. Dude has 11 completions in the NFL. It's entirely possible running the ball a ton is good for him. Like we just don't know that. Like we're kind of operating under this assumption, like it'll be a top 15 QB, and I'm just not ready to do that. I think Bieniemy is the clear choice if you can get him. I don't know that he'll come. I don't know that he'd leave KC. I don't know. It seems like the head coaching options aren't going to be there. Arizona at this moment is still open, but it sure seems like that's going to be John Gannon, I think. I don't know how you can be an NFL owner and have just watched the Super Bowl and call the Eagles D coordinator instead of the Chiefs O coordinator. Like remove all the names, like just put them as like pegs on a board. And like, I would want that peg over that peg. But the Bieniemy thing seems very up in the air. You can make a real argument that he would want to come here because if you come here and you get Howell to play well and the offense functions well, you are going to get all the credit, all of it. And I don't know that exists anywhere else for him. And I don't know. I also wonder if coming to the NFC would be advantageous to get out of Allen, Burrow. Baltimore's usually pretty good. Herbert, like the AFC is just a way more stacked conference.
Yeah.
Should we do a little Chase Young here before we have to wrap?
Real quick, you guys want to react to Bieniemy or whatever.
One last, I was gonna say for Bieniemy, I mean, we just had an ownership discussion, and I think we all agree that if it happens, more than likely, if it happens, it's going to happen in the next basically month or so. Is there, is not that Ron wants to wait to hire an offensive coordinator, but is there an ownership like, hey, let's hold off on figuring out what we're going to do until we know who the hell the owner is? Because you had the Sean Payton report last week where he said some potential Commanders owners had reached out to see if he would be interested. Do you think there's any chance that there's a moratorium on hiring, as we've all heard and seen at different companies that we work for, until ownership and front office stuff gets worked out?
I don't know, but it's interesting. I don't think there's a moratorium on hiring, but I do think if you're going to get Bieniemy, you're going to have to pay him more than all the rest of these dudes. And maybe there's a moratorium on going to the top of the assistant coach market, which is pocket change for when you're going to sell something. Let's say it goes low and it's $5.2 billion, which I think it'll be well north of. But still, what you got to give them a 3-year, $10 million deal? Like you could swing it. I don't know. I don't know that. I also want to, similarly, earlier we talked about, the push to get minority ownership across the league. How important is it to an organization that has truly embraced trying to be a forward-thinking group to at least hire a minority candidate as offense coordinator? And I don't know, but find it interesting. If I had to go, I don't know. I kind of think it might end up being Bieniemy, man. I don't know.
Really?
I don't know. But I think if there was stability, it would look a lot more seductive. But the lack of stability is difficult.
Yeah.
Nothing like a little seductive talk on Valentine's Day.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true. It's all about seduction. I think the good news is, at least with all these names now, I'm removing my chips from the Ken Zampese spot of the board officially. I think it'll be someone other than Zampese. It might be Shermer, which wouldn't get me too seduced, but these other names are at least more attractive.
There's always, I mean, JP's most salient point about all this was we tried for Matt Stafford. We ended up with Ryan Fitzpatrick. There's all of this could very well come down to,
I wouldn't
we
take
Greg
all
Roman.
my chips off Zampese.
Yeah, we tried for Bieniemy. Unfortunately, we got to stick with Zampese. Let's do Chase Young real quick.
I still think it'd be Shermer ahead of Zampese, but I wouldn't take all my chips off Zampese.
Yeah.
Too late. They're already off the board. All right, Chase Young, real quick. Down at Super Bowl Radio Row, Ron Rivera is doing the rounds and said he's not decided whether to pick up Chase's fifth-year option. Chase is going to make $5.3 million in 2023, and in 2024, his fifth-year option would be more than $17 million. They have until May to decide. Ron is clearly trying to motivate Chase. He said this worked with Duron. Duron came and balled out. Now we have to pay him. If we don't do this with Chase, Chase is going to have the same reaction. I don't know if Chase will have the same reaction, and I think Ron and Chase have had a pretty eventful relationship where maybe they don't see eye to eye as much, and Chase might be a hard guy to see eye to eye with because he comes from such a pedigree. This caught me off guard. I thought even with Chase's last 2 seasons, they would pick this up. This is the right move from my shorts are too tight. I'm a football coach from the 70s. I have a whistle around my neck. You need to earn your spot. But with Chase and with the talent that's there, this struck me as an odd move, or at least odd quotes from Ron. Maybe they still end up picking it up regardless.
Yeah, I mean, they have had a rocky relationship. You think about early on, Ron talked about him and Chase sitting down and watching tape together to try and figure out how he could be better. And Ron did a really good job of not calling out Chase in the media early on. And then when he got frustrated later in that season, you started hearing him talk about some of the mistakes Chase was making. You go to last season, and Ron, pussyfooted around the whole thing, but the organization couldn't have been happy with the way that everything went down with him coming back from injury and all that. But all Ron talked about was we want when Chase feels healthy and can go 100%, like he's, he'll be ready to go. I think it's a straight up challenge to Chase in public, and it's a weird, take from Ron who kind of zigzags and goes up and down and all around in terms of how he wants to handle player negotiations and relationships and stuff like that. But I think after last season's, I'll call them shenanigans at best, with Chase coming back from the knee injury and how long it took after they activated him off the PUP list. I think this is Ron issuing an offseason challenge to Chase, which feels odd considering the way that he's handled Cam Curl and other players along the way. But the one thing about the Commanders front office that they've done a pretty good job of is when they work on these extensions and stuff like that, you really don't hear a whole lot of discussion about it, and it just kind of pops up at the end. I think of both Logan Thomas and John Allen. There wasn't a whole lot of chatter about those things getting done.
They talked about the John Allen deal for months.
They talked about it, but
we care about John. We're going to get that done.
There was 3 months of
Terry and John. They did that.
Quiet. Terry, they definitely did. But
here's what I think: if they view their challenge to Daron Payne as a success, I think they're all lying. They tried to trade him twice. Duron showed up, balled out. They tried to trade him at the draft and before the beginning of the season, or at least kick the tires on it. And now they're going to have to tag him, which is just a road to nowhere. Like that's the plan. That's the upside. I don't think they're getting a deal done there. I don't think this was the right way to handle it. I think you've lost all leverage in the situation. If you did want to consider a trade, now you probably don't have to. And the Chase situation is very, very different. If I had to guess, they're probably still more upset about the lack of playmaking in 21 than the injury timeline in 22. Like the injury timeline in 22 clearly went longer than everybody expected, but go watch the tape from 21 because I don't know. And then you're coming back from a major knee injury. I think whether you're lying or not, and Lord knows football coaches lie, you get asked that question, oh, of course we're picking that up.
Yeah.
Of course.
Creating a story out of nothing. You just made a huge deal.
All of these coaches lie all the time. Even if you're lying, oh, of course we're picking that up. Because it has more value. I don't know that they're trading him. I don't even know that will be under consideration. But if you're not picking up his option, you should start considering all these things. And there's more value to trade him if you have the option.
Yep. I
I don't think you should trade him, and I think you should pick up the option for the record.
Yeah, let's
definitely should pick up the option.
Yeah, that's the normal way. Give him 2 more years here, and if he's great, then you sign him to a $1 billion contract with Jeff Bezos at the helm and Eric Bieniemy as head coach.